The purpose of this presentation is to cover some fundamentals of rescuing and turning around businesses that are failing or struggling, with a focus on how franchisees and small to medium business owners, as well as franchisors, can make quick improvements and gains. This is an introduction only and not intended to replace comprehensive and specific advice. All viewers and listeners should complete their own research and investigations before taking any action based on this presentation. The opinions expressed throughout this presentation are those of the presenter, and while well researched and gained through decades of industry experience, they do not necessarily represent the opinions of FMS Support Services. Unless specifically mentioned, no assumptions should be made about the identity of any individuals, franchisees, or franchisors referenced in this presentation. Hello, this is Shaun Butcher from FMS Support Services again. We are focused on assisting franchisors and franchisees and all manner of small, medium and large businesses, especially those dealing with the complexities of operating multiple sites. We provide a full suite of diverse support services to assist these businesses on their journey. Throughout the last 30 years, I've been consistently involved in franchising in some format or another. I've worked on both sides of the fence as a franchisee and franchisor. I have owned or part-owned 16 of my own franchises, plus one franchisor, and consistently worked as an executive or a consultant to many of Australia's up-and-coming franchisors as well as industry leaders. This presentation is best viewed through somewhere like YouTube, so you can see the keynotes on the screen, but is also suitable for listening as an audio podcast for those who like to take in information while driving, jogging, cleaning, or doing something else. However, I will work through this presentation in a way that can be dual-purposed for viewing and or listening without trying to confuse either audience. But if you are confused, please definitely review with the video format visible. This is part of a series of presentations in an effort to address many of the most common questions, concerns, and topics that I'm asked frequently about. I'll speak as honestly as I can and provide as much genuine insight as I can without sugarcoating anything. And if that offends people, then please cease viewing or listening. I'm no technical genius, and my goal this time around is to see if I can keep the sound quality a bit more consistent throughout. That's beginner stuff, I know, and we'll see by the end how successful I am. Now, with that said, let's start by getting a bit of an understanding about what we're going to be talking about today. Now, this has really been my passion over the years. Every franchise location I've purchased personally has been in a very bad situation. Generally, I have paid little more than $1 as the businesses were in such bad shape and the people selling them, often the franchisor, was just desperate to stop losing money as they had no idea how to run them. However, I've also been heavily involved in turning around franchisors who were experiencing significant difficulty and hemorrhaging money as well. Some of these turnarounds consisted of segments of a franchisor, such as the operations and training teams or corporate-owned divisions, which are all the locations owned by the franchisor instead of the franchisees. And these are often run at massive losses in far too many franchise networks. I've also been heavily involved in turning around bottom-performing franchisees and networks, or in other cases, the entire franchisor and franchisee network. This topic will be broken down into two different presentations. The first presentation will largely focus on a basic, generic structure for rescuing and turning around a business, with a focus more on a single site as it applies to franchisees and small or medium-sized businesses, for example. However, the basic strategy is also relevant to much larger organizations, such as an entire franchisor and franchisee network, if necessary. And the second presentation will be focused much more on rescuing and turning around franchisors, which is something that's a lot more complicated. Hopefully this will be released in a few weeks after the Q&A for this presentation. I should also clarify that this is based on my experience doing exactly this type of thing, which has been quite extensive, and the way that I approach such situations to get results, often starting from a very difficult and almost impossible position. I'm well aware that other people may have a totally different perspective. Some of them may have even got experience doing exactly the same type of turnarounds in a different way, and that's perfectly okay. This is my perspective and my approach based on my learnings, and it has consistently produced results for me. Generally, results that I've seldom seen matched, and in most cases, record breaking and industry leading results for their time. I haven't always got it right, but I've learned from the mistakes and tried not to make the same mistakes twice. And hopefully, I can pass this learning and experience on, so people don't have to make the same mistakes I did and learn the hard way on their journey. All right, let's move on. So, what are we talking about here? Common types of rescue and turnaround situations that business owners or managers may be confronted with. Here's a few of them. Number one, businesses that are losing money. Without doubt, this is the top reason that makes it obvious to a business that they are in trouble. However, concerningly, many will leave it until very late to reach out for help or try something different, while living under the belief that things will somehow magically turn around. Oftentimes, these businesses have been in decline for a very long time, and often many quarters, or often years in some cases. And they crossed the break-even threshold going downhill and started losing money a long, long time ago, with the amounts increasing over time, or in some cases, they just never made money from the first day. They may have tried some drastic and random measures, such as chopping and changing staff, cutting back on marketing, or alternatively throwing excessive amounts of money at marketing, and that just didn't work. Very scaringly, in franchise networks, many franchisees have often been given the generally severely flawed and wrong advice that if they invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in upgrades, cosmetics, new equipment, refits, new designs, relocations, and other very, very expensive things, that this will somehow bring in millions of dollars in extra sales, thereby putting themselves in crippling levels of debt for little or no benefit. I say generally flawed because there are some franchise networks where the recommended investments are well thought through and do provide a return on investment. But sadly, this is a minority in my experience. Number two is businesses on a steep downward trajectory. If business owners are a little bit more alert, they may identify a downward trajectory, generally in both revenue and profitability, and will reach out for assistance early before the situation gets too bad. This is where it is important to really pay attention to your numbers. Often graphs are the most direct and blunt way to really see which way a business is trending. Graphs are great for telling a story that is very hard to refute. And then next, in our common types of rescue and turnaround operations, businesses with significant reputational issues. Now, sometimes businesses have developed a serious reputational issue. This may have been with the assistance of the media and sometimes social media when they have really zeroed in on a particular business for an error or mistake, or sometimes because they found something they didn't like. I've seen several businesses, particularly franchise businesses in regional towns, completely bankrupted because a local independent competitor managed to get the media and local social media convinced that the franchise business was part of an evil corporation trying to take over their nice little town. Sometimes the reputational damage can be deserved, but other times it is extremely unfair. It doesn't take much to get a media or social media bandwagon going sometimes. I once had a pizza franchise in a regional town, which I didn't actively run day to day as I was working somewhere else. And as part of my other job, I had to regularly catch flights to different cities. I checked the store's social media page before I got on a plane one day, and all was normal. By the time I got off the plane, about 90 minutes later, the social media had blown up with hundreds or maybe thousands of locals calling for blood. because some woman had accused one of the store's delivery drivers of doing something reckless on the road and then becoming abusive towards her. I also had the local newspaper, back in the day when there was such a thing, wanting to write an article about irresponsible pizza delivery drivers in town, based on the interest that the post had generated. And this was all in the first 90 minutes in a fairly small regional town. Thankfully, unbeknownst to the woman who had made the post and had actually quite misrepresented the facts, the delivery driver had dashcam, which supported his version of events, and we were able to quieten the whole thing down fairly quickly. But it still did some significant damage to the business. And it just goes to show how quickly these things can take off and how irrelevant facts were before large volumes of useful idiots jumped on bandwagons to support this woman. And there never seems to be a lack of people with little going on in their lives to get on a bandwagon. The amount of damage that this type of issue can create depends on how widespread the coverage is and how it is handled by the business. I've regularly seen businesses lose 30% or more of their sales revenue immediately, and even with well-managed recovery plans, take 12 months or more to get the sales revenue back. I've seen massive franchisors lose huge sales Australia-wide because of supposed exposés on current affairs shows, bad press, and even litigation. Now, 30% may not seem so bad, but in Australia, most businesses are already losing money or sitting with a profit margin of between 0 and 15%. Most just cannot afford to lose this amount of sales revenue and expect to survive unless they have good cash or credit reserves to draw on. Next. Number 4 is businesses with significant operational issues. So sometimes proactive businesses may simply realize that they have big operational issues. They aren't meeting their customer needs. They aren't offering the same quality or level of service that their competitors are. Or maybe they just don't really know what they are doing. I wish this awareness came up more often as the early warning sign before the business starts to lose a lot of money. Unfortunately, this is generally one of the key reasons why businesses fail, but remains unidentified and generally disputed by everybody in the business, who usually insist that they are doing a great job, despite the evidence to the contrary. And this will ultimately manifest itself in big financial losses down the track. Next, number 5 is businesses with significant staffing and team issues. Now, this is an interesting one because I personally have found that when a business is convinced it has a staffing and team problem, the truth can often be a little more nuanced. About 1/3 of the time, I would say the business is right. They have a team that has become lazy, stuck in their ways, misguided, or whatever. In another 1/3 of cases, I would say the primary problem is the business leadership, which is actually the biggest problem. Toxic management, unskilled or incompetent managers, has become much more common in recent times, as the criteria for successful managers has become less about results and more about airy-fairy BS. It is sadly not uncommon now to see senior and executive level managers, including CEOs, that have never achieved any real results in their entire career. But they either talk a very positive game, or maybe they've achieved some DIE, diversity, inclusiveness, and equity targets, or implemented a new environmental measure, or possibly rebranded a company to some pretty new colors, which most likely all did nothing to increase revenue or profitability. Increasingly, in many industries, including franchising, it has become more and more about who you know and not what you know. I realize that is an old saying, but in the age of LinkedIn and social media, the ability to supposedly know people has improved without actually having much genuine understanding of who they are or what they are capable of, just what they choose to self-promote, which leads to a lot of underperformers that have good relationships or are liked within the industry continually being able to move around one failure after another. I'm amazed at where many of them pop up, and it certainly does the businesses and the companies they show up in no favours. The senior executive will then incorrectly blame their team when their results are called into question or can't be hidden or talked around. The telltale signs of this are companies with massive turnover, either because the company keeps replacing staff or staff keep quitting. There is one franchisor that comes to mind in Australia that has probably employed more people than any other company in franchising. Not necessarily because they are large, although they still have a significant number of sites, but because they lose so many staff so regularly. And on a regular basis, they just fire their entire support team and rehire as a way of looking like they're fixing a problem, when of course the problem is actually the leadership and has been the leadership all along. Incidentally, the company is quite literally worth less than 1% of what it was at its peak and has had more negative press than just about any franchisor I can think of. But there have been very few real changes at the top of the company, just the lower levels. The final one-third of the time, I would say it is a case of where both the senior leadership and the wider team are actually the problem. The situation would normally have started from the top with the leadership, and then they have either recruited poorly or trained people in their own image, or sometimes turned the wider team to be so toxic and hateful of the organisation that they refuse to achieve anything and just sit there doing very little and trying to find another job, taking advantage of anything they can while returning no value to the company, and even sometimes engaging in subtle sabotage. There is another franchise I worked with briefly about 25 years ago when I was a relatively fresh area manager, and they paid all their staff atrociously and treated them equally as poorly, and it flowed all the way through the organisation. It started at the top, but what I saw manifested in their stores, especially their corporate and company-owned stores, was that almost everybody in there was either so useless they couldn't get another job, or the staff that did have the potential to get another job were either looking for another job and would soon find one, or they were stealing everything they possibly could: cash, products, even equipment. And everybody knew it and nobody cared. A lot of staff made more from stealing than they did from their pay each week. The franchise was so rotten from top to bottom, like so many others, I left pretty quickly. But a great example of what can happen when that kind of toxicity continues unchecked for an extended period of time. Either way, these are all very serious situations that need to be urgently addressed. Continuing the same way with the same people will not suddenly create a different result. Okay, next. Number 6, businesses with significant competitors entering the market. Now, those businesses with foresight will be planning for future competitors entering the market ahead of time. It is seldom that a competitor entering the market won't have an impact, although a lot of businesses wait until afterwards when they have seen their sales revenue decline substantially before taking any action. Next. Number 7 is businesses operating in markets with significant economic challenges. So sometimes businesses may find themselves in trouble because of no real fault of their own. Many businesses experienced this during COVID trading restrictions and lockdowns that sent so many businesses bust, and for which many businesses still have not recovered in 2025. It's also led to the term zombie businesses to describe the large number of businesses that are completely dead but still trading, just waiting for something to shut them down. Now, other times, it could be wider economic issues like interest rate rises, inflation, high unemployment, or cost of living pressures, a lot of which we're currently experiencing now in Australia. And then other times, it can be much more localized, such as often seen in regional areas where a major employer, such as a factory or mine, shuts down, Or maybe there is a big tourism downturn or a bad farming season in a farming region. And these can all have a big impact on the businesses in these areas. And then finally, number 8 is businesses experiencing most or all of the above. Sadly, in my experience, when businesses reach out for assistance, they generally have most or all of the above problems. No doubt, this makes it much more challenging to fix. Most importantly, in my experience, almost everything is fixable. It's just that most people are not familiar with how to do it, and it requires a very unique skill set, or alternatively, a lot of money. I personally have never been called in to fix anything that had a bucket of money to assist, although it would be very nice for a change. I always seem to get the call from those that ran out of money ages ago and are now in a massive amount of debt and on the verge of being wound up. However, I love a challenge, and I am proud to be able to assist these businesses out of their situation, particularly when we are talking about franchisors, where there are so many mum and dad franchisees who are reliant upon the success and survival of the franchisor for their survival, not to mention team member jobs on the line as well. Now, in my experience, the people that reach out for help in these situations are the current business owners, executives, or boards who want to fix their current situation. However, there are people who will also seek out such businesses specifically to buy them. So that leads us on to the next question. So why would anybody buy a business in need of rescuing or turning around? Basically, because other than those that find their current business evolving into something that needs rescuing or turning around, there are a lot of people, like me, who actively look for these type of businesses to buy, and others that unfortunately find themselves buying such a business, even though it wasn't their intention, and they believe they were buying something that was actually in pretty good shape. So let's look at this in a bit more detail and explore different reasons why people might buy a business in need of rescuing or turning around. Number one, and the most obvious, is that it's much cheaper than a business that is in a good condition. So, as I said, this is probably the top reason. A lot of people don't have a large amount of money. And if you don't have access to a large amount of money, you probably also struggle to get finance, which leaves you buying a cheap business. This was how I got started after having quite a good early career as a very young pizza franchise manager. I had essentially done myself out of a job as an area manager by that stage, who was looking after corporate sites. But when the corporate sites started to make money, they were all sold to franchisees, and I was left without a job. The franchisor very kindly gave me the choice of moving interstate and starting that type of position again, or trying to find work with a franchisee, or buying two freshly failed restaurants for a very cheap price. Now, being that it was either just before or just after I'd turned 19, I think just after I'd turned 19, I had very little money, but I scraped together what I could to take advantage of the opportunity to purchase the two failed restaurants that were losing about $8,000 between them each week. It was very shortly after that that I learned the importance of working capital, which I didn't have, and also really refined the skills necessary to rescue and turn around businesses with literally no money and very few resources other than my own hard work with which to play with, which was then made even harder by the fact that the brand I was with had started experiencing strong competition very soon after that, and then failed to respond to that competition, which meant the brand, the franchisor, and many of the franchisees declined rapidly afterwards. However, in the end, sales revenue increased quickly for myself by hundreds of percent, and the businesses became very profitable. So this can definitely work out for people, but you need to be a little smarter, or perhaps a lot smarter up front than I was, to increase your odds. Next reason somebody might buy a business in need of rescuing or turning around is the opportunity to add significant value to the business and then sell it for a significantly higher price. Now, this flows on logically from being able to purchase a business at a cheap price. Assuming you are able to improve the business and make it profitable, then the value of that business will normally be far more than you paid for it. In the example I gave previously, where I purchased my first two businesses, those businesses became exponentially more valuable than what they were when I bought them. So the approach definitely works. Next. Number 3 reason. There might be limited opportunities available within a suitable geographical area or within a certain franchise. Now, sometimes when people are looking for a business to buy, there might be only limited options. This could be because the buyer is in a regional area with only limited businesses available to purchase, which forces the buyer to take a poorer performing business, assuming that they refuse to wait or do something else in the interim. Likewise, even in metropolitan areas, there might still only be limited businesses of the style the buyer wants, or the buyer might want a business very close to home, or maybe the buyer really wants to be part of a particular in-demand franchise. Then the buyer may need to take something that is less than perfect. Next, the buyer might be looking for a challenge. While most people would probably say that simply taking on a challenge is not a great reason to take a risk on a business, it certainly happens, and I would be lying if I said it wasn't something that I looked for in a business. Being a challenge can keep people such as myself motivated and inspired to keep doing better rather than becoming bored, and so long as the fundamentals of the purchase and the plan stack up, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Next on our list of why people might buy a business in need of rescuing or turning around is the buyer may not have done appropriate research and due diligence prior to purchase. Now, this is where it starts to get really scary. Sellers will naturally try and get the best price they can for their business and often have a very inflated view of what their business is worth, based on things that don't really matter, such as their years of hard work, emotional investment, and even the amount of money they invested or have lost. The buyer, however, needs to be much more discerning and really do their research to ensure that they understand what they are buying and are paying a fair price for it. Check out the presentation in this series, Episode 1, Franchise Buyer Beware, for a list of fundamentals to look for when buying a business. Although this was focused on franchising, the reality is that a good portion of it is relevant to buying any business, franchise or not. Too often, buyers have made decisions to purchase a business based exclusively on what could be called silly, emotive, or short-sighted reasons, like buying a pizza shop because you really like pizza, buying a business because you're a big fan of them, buying a business because it looks flashy and cool, or buying a business for prestige, or because you think it'll make you popular in your social circles. Now, all of those such things can be considered in the buying process, but you definitely still need to be diligent. Do your research and ensure that the business stacks up logically from a purchase perspective, is financially viable, fits your skill sets, etc., etc. Otherwise, you risk being stuck with something you have overpaid for, can't run, and has put you on the fast track to bankruptcy. Next on our list of reasons why people might buy a business in need of rescuing or turning around. Number 6, the buyer has been actively deceived by the seller, broker, or franchisor in the case of franchises. Sadly, there are sellers out there, both selling their own business as well as business brokers, who will actively deceive potential buyers to sell them a business at a highly inflated price or sell a dud business under the illusion that the business is actually a great success story. I guess the difference between this and the previous point is that the previous point was about the buyer's ignorance, whereas this is the seller or the seller's representative intentionally deceiving the buyer, which means they are actively trying to hide things, misrepresent things, and trick or con potential buyers. This intention makes it much more dangerous for potential buyers, especially if the sellers know what they are doing. Sadly, there are certain franchises that have repeatedly been caught out knowingly and intentionally selling dud franchise businesses for very inflated prices to buyers. Ultimately, potential sellers who engage in this type of activity will alter financials and sales and make the business appear more profitable than it is, amongst many other things. Once again, the episode 1, Franchise Buyer Beware, will be a useful place to start if wanting to understand how buyers are commonly conned or trapped, both in franchising and outside of franchising. Now, I don't want to bag out franchises too much because it really depends on the franchisor. Unethical and poor franchisors can certainly use their skills and resources to be very deceptive, and a few have been very publicly called out for this. Alternatively, many of the franchisors I've been involved with actually use their skills and resources to ensure everything is fair and reasonable, and nobody is being deceived. For example, good quality franchisors will review the information that a selling franchisee is making available, make sure that sales and financials are reasonable, and the price is within the realms of what's fair. Good quality franchisors will also ensure that the buyer is fully aware of what they are buying, has done their due diligence, got professional advice, and is ultimately making an informed and educated decision. So let's start going into a bit more detail about what you can do if you decide to or have inadvertently bought a business in need of rescuing or turning around. Once again, this is my approach, and it has consistently generated results for me and others in both small, medium, and large organizations. Some may not necessarily agree, or they may enter such situations with their own approach, and that's perfectly fine. Ultimately, you will need to decide what works for you, and there is more than one way to skin a cat. Not that I've ever skinned a cat, nor do I really know how many ways there are to do it. And FYI, no cats were harmed during the making of this presentation. Okay, so the first thing you need to do, step 1, do your research. Fairly universal advice to be sure, but always the best place to start. Now, to be more specific about what you need to research, number 1, critically analyze the information provided to you by the seller. If you're buying an existing business, regardless of whether you believe it's in trouble or in need of an urgent turnaround or not, then just like if you were to buy a second-hand car or a house, you need to really scrutinize the information that you are provided with. Cross-check as much information as possible through multiple data sources. And once again, a reasonable starting point for this is a presentation in this series called Episode 1, Franchise Buyer Beware. If you're buying a franchise, it's an insight into how unethical franchisors can trick and trap buyers, and some things to be sure you're researching and checking. However, individual operators and sellers can also use these tricks and traps as well. And once the money has changed hands, it's very hard to do anything about it if you have been tricked or failed to do your due diligence. And speaking of franchises, if you are buying a franchise, you need to do as much research on the franchisor and the success of the entire network as you do on the individual business, as this is going to have a very big impact on any franchise you buy. In simple terms, when part of a franchise, it has a huge impact on your ability to succeed as a franchisee. I've worked in networks with terrible franchisees who are very successful because the franchisor ensures their success. And I've seen other networks where even the best franchisees are struggling to survive because the actions of the franchisor are either pointless or detrimental to their business. Next thing to consider when doing your research. Number 2, critically analyze the market, including competitors, potential customer numbers, demographics, etc., etc. You need to really assess the market that you're going to operate in, not just now, but for the future as well. Some things to question might be, how many competitors are there? How strong are they? How close are they? Are there new competitors expected? Particularly if you are going head to head with franchise competitors, their future sites will often be posted months or years in advance. Likewise for competitors going into new shopping centres. Question if the market is growing. Are more people moving into the area? Is there development and growth in the area? What are the demographics of customers? Are they the right age, gender, income level, family status, etc.? For example, maybe not a great idea to open an indoor play centre in an area populated by young singles or couples without kids who predominantly live in units, or in an area occupied by high numbers of aged care pensioners. Naturally, these days there is a wealth of information available on the internet to assist you in making these decisions. Next thing to consider in your research. Number 3, understand how customers are perceiving the business. Spend time in the business and understand how customers feel about the business. Are they grumbling about long wait times, poor service, rude staff, incorrect orders, or outrageous prices? Does the business open late and close early, thereby turning away and picking off customers? Check their reviews on Google, Facebook, TripAdvisor, and any other place you can find reviews. If it's a food business, definitely don't forget about Uber Eats and DoorDash and any other food delivery services, if applicable in your area. Now, sometimes you will be able to search for informal reviews and opinions on local group social media pages, where lots of people may share their views simultaneously, which can be very insightful. Occasionally, there may even be some official media coverage to consider as well. Pay particular attention to patterns, such as consistent failures or things the business does right. Compare the business to other similar businesses. Consider the level of hate or love directed at the business, and if it is infuriating people, this is very different to if people are indifferent. Also note how or even if the business responds to feedback, along with reviews and complaints. If the business goes to war with customers, then this is a real problem. If it deals with complaints in a way that brings customers back, this is obviously much more positive. Then to really understand what makes this business tick. Number 4, study the long-term history of the business. For decades now, most businesses have been using computers, POS systems, record-keeping systems, etc. This means access to years of data, which can often tell a very good story, particularly from a revenue perspective. Look at when sales were at their highest. If the business performed best when there was a particular strategy employed, did sales revenue decline when certain things happened, such as marketing campaigns, price increases, menu changes, management changes, etc.? Now, by putting explanations to the changes, you can learn what has worked well and what hasn't. A funny experience that I've actually had many times now, but I'll talk about this one time because it is so stark. There was a franchise network I stepped into years back as part of a rescue and turnaround that had effectively been doing everything wrong, and the numbers showed. Every franchisee site was losing money. The franchisor was losing money and days away from being wound up. Everybody was in astronomical amounts of debt and being sued by so many people for payment. It was hard to keep track of. Nonetheless, we were able to turn it around quite quickly by employing a full spectrum of changes that were statistically likely to work. And within a couple of years, average sales revenue had tripled, new sites were opening, the franchisees could now sell their business for good money, and everybody was out of debt and things were good. My involvement ceased, and the founders took control of the franchisor again and went straight back to doing everything they did in the past that got them into trouble, under the same deluded assumption that it was now going to work because the franchise network was starting from a very healthy position. Not surprisingly, they got themselves exactly the same result. Within months, There were serious signs of trouble. Within a year, sites were closing. Sales revenue had halved across the board. Suppliers, landlords, and franchisees were now suing again. And it was a disaster that just kept getting worse. Now, we always graph the results so we can see the pattern and the effect of different actions. We backdated and we graphed the decline for years before I got there and the period while I was there. If you then graphed it afterwards and add in a few key dates like the change of people running the organization, the strategy changes, the marketing promotions, and the major events or circumstances, you got a very full picture of what has worked and what hasn't. Amazingly, there is always a majority of people who just don't do this. And even when it is clearly put to them, their personal bias will often stop them seeing it. But if you're intelligent and objective, then you can learn a lot from what your predecessors have done and experienced, as well as anything you do, if you do in fact end up doing anything at all with that particular business. Now, you can expand on this a bit. Number 5, review the marketing and promotional activity, if applicable, and understand how it is resonating with customers. So, once again, if applicable, look back at the marketing and promotional history of the business. Then correlate that with performance data of the business. Once again, with computerized records, and especially if you have access to a computerized POS system or something similar, you can really dig into the data to see what the effects were. If marketing campaigns were successful, then there should be evidence in the data. Now, I know a lot of marketing types out there in this day and age are peddling the BS narrative that there is no direct link to marketing activity and sales revenue, and that marketing is an exclusively long-term process that subtly influences how customers subconsciously feel about the brand, and blah, 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 blah. Now, this might be true for a small amount of the marketing budget, and is generally somewhat true for mega corporations like Apple and Google that own the market and the world. But for everybody in a normal day-to-day business, if the marketing expenditure of the business isn't resulting in an increase in sales or the movement of particular products and services, then it is probably not meeting the needs of the business. I can't even recall how many times I have taken a company's marketing budget, almost always for one in serious trouble, big or small, that is being spent but achieving absolutely nothing, and restructured it to achieve an increase in sales and business profitability, and it works. Even more so if the business has been doing pointless, wasteful marketing activity for a long time, then it works especially well when you give the public and the customers marketing that actually prompts a call to action. In simple terms, 98% of the time, marketing and promotional activity should have a measurable impact. If it doesn't, then it is being done wrong, which is often where the biggest opportunity lay in turning around a business quickly and easily. Anybody who tells you different, normally, once again, an academic type marketing person with little real world success, is wrong. If you want to hear me rant about this, please let me know, because these academic, theoretical, off with the fairies marketing types who have often remodeled their entire position description to be one with no accountability and no results required are usually a cancer on the business and the organizations they operate within, especially businesses that are failing. I should obviously clarify that I am not classifying all marketing people like this, just the ones that generally get businesses into trouble. Anyway, expect marketing activity to generate measurable results. If it doesn't, then change and evolve it. Not everything will work 100% of the time, but learn from it and move on. Don't keep doing it and expecting a different result. Of course, during this research phase, you are purely focused on learning about what has been done previously, what has worked, and what didn't. You're not fixing anything just yet. And then next, for some real grunt work, spend time in the business and understand why it is really failing. Now, once again, assuming you are looking at a business that is failing here, I've spent a lot of time getting companies, small, medium, and large, back on track. And the one thing I can tell you is that when I have asked the current management, operators, executives, owners, board, or whoever is in charge, why the business or company is failing, which is generally one of my first questions, 95% of the time, the reason I get is wrong or diluted. This is due to the personal bias of the current leadership, who are almost always convinced that everything they are doing is correct and there are no problems, or there is some external factor that is the cause of their problem. It's the competitors, it's the economy, it's the customers, it's just the phase, it's bad employees, it's legislative requirements, it's a legacy of previous management, it's the computer systems, it's the franchisor, it's the franchisees, it's the suppliers, it's the landlord, it's the weather, etc., etc., etc. Of course, sometimes these reasons can be real. However, the sad reality is that even if the current leadership of any business tries to tell you honestly why they are failing, they will seldom get it right because of their own personal bias and genuine inability to look at the situation objectively. Additionally, even if the current leadership can tell you what the problem is, they probably don't know the solutions or they would have implemented it already. Probably the only exception I've seen to this regularly is in smaller businesses where the owner is just tired and worn out from working long hours year after year. They often know they aren't putting in the effort and quality leadership that is needed, and the results reflect this. Now, personally, I like to look closely and observe any business I'm taking responsibility for a minimum of at least 2 weeks, probably more depending on what it is and how much time is available. This means hanging out in the business and seeing how staff work, seeing how customers feel, seeing what works, what doesn't. Naturally, the seller of the business and probably the staff will want to put their best foot forward to anybody actively watching. But within a couple of weeks, any charade normally starts to break down. Now, once you have observed a business that is failing, you almost certainly come up with a long list of problems. It is very seldom one reason, although you might be able to group them into a broad category. It is important to really go into the detail because the details are what you will need to change if you go ahead with the purchase of the business. And then finally, when doing your research, number 7, if buying a franchise, always research the entire franchise as well. Now, I've already covered this, but if you're buying a franchise, it is extremely important to understand how the franchisor is performing and manage day to day, as it will have a big impact on your success. It is impossible to operate a franchise business without the influence of the franchisor and their decision making, good or bad. I personally have found myself on previous occasions stuck in a franchise network as a franchisee where the franchisor went bust and into external administration and watched my site go from being worth around $800,000 based on its profitability to being worth nothing because the franchisor was so toxic. And at that point, and for several years prior, nobody would ever buy into that particular franchise because of the franchisor. Now, that's an extreme example, but there have certainly been a lot of franchisors who have gone bust, been placed into administration or liquidated, and there have been more that tread a very fine line each day. However, even more common than that are franchisors who have a hostile relationship with their franchisees, make poor decisions, engage in pointless marketing and promotion, introduce expensive changes or demands for no benefit, etc. Now, there are a lot of good franchisors out there as well who increase and enhance the success of their franchisees, as they well should, but you need to be sure if you are going into a franchise network which situation you are dealing with. The franchise industry will often tout the fact that the industry on average has a far better success rate than business in general, which is very true. However, keep in mind that the majority of business in Australia will fail within just a few years, so that certainly doesn't mean you are guaranteed success. And within the franchise industry, there are absolutely winners and losers. All franchises and franchisors are not created equally. Once again, check out the presentation in this series called Episode 1, Franchise Buyer Beware, to understand what type of things to look for if you are buying a franchise location. Now, once you've done all this research and you understand as much as you can, let's look at what you need to do with it. So step 2 is analyze and be brutally honest. For some reason, people find this really difficult to be completely honest and objective. But it's an incredibly beneficial skill and essential for assessing if a foray into rescuing or turning around a business has any chance of being successful. Some of the things you need to be very honest and objectively consider after you have done your research and before you go any further are: number 1, why is the business failing? Now, we touched a bit on this before, but this is the crux of what you really need to understand. Is it a result of things that are fixable? In a majority of cases, in my experience, the vast majority of businesses are capable of being fixed by doing things differently. I would say that something like 90 to 98% of those businesses currently in trouble. However, in the overwhelming majority of circumstances where I have stepped in to rescue or assist in turning around a business, small, medium, or large, the majority of so-called experts deemed it a complete write-off, unfixable. Usually, it was just a matter that they were either not experienced enough, not thinking straight, too emotional, or simply not prepared to do the necessary work. In a lot of cases, in my experience, particularly in franchising, some franchisors are very quick to simply consider a location unfixable, especially when it is a franchisee's livelihood and life savings on the line. Then they like to turn around and say they're making a tough decision to allow it to fail and close. The tough decision would, of course, actually be to find solutions and push forward successfully. So, be honest and objective about if things or what things are fixable. However, on the flip side of this, you also need to be honest and assess, is this a result of things that are not capable of being fixed? Now, sometimes things are not fixable for a range of reasons. It could be the entire market has changed, access to the business has been heavily affected by road rerouting, maybe the shopping centre where it's located has died, or maybe the entire town has died, such as a mining community after mines have shut down, for example. If it is a result of things that are not capable of being fixed, then obviously this is a business you probably want to steer clear of. Now, you also need to consider, if buying a franchise, will the franchisor genuinely assist in fixing the situation or not? I also have to add to that, is the franchisor a huge part of the reason the business is failing in the first place? In some cases, the franchisor can actually be the reason for the failure. We touched a bit on this before, but a big giveaway on the franchisor being a problem is if there is a large percentage of franchisees failing, very few locations are ever fixed or moving forward, there is a large number of closures, and even the franchisor's attitude to all of the above. In a couple of cases over the years, I've seen franchisors openly discuss at high levels and actually withdrawing activity and support to expedite the failure of certain franchisees and locations they didn't like, which is really akin to sabotaging those franchisees and locations. Disgusting behavior. As mentioned previously, if buying a franchise business, the actions of the franchisor are extremely important to your success. Now, unfortunately, every franchisor is going to tell you they are supportive and they know what they are doing and are experts, and some legitimately really are. But sadly, some are absolutely clueless and others are completely and deliberately unethical in their conduct, and this will see you fail because they will see you as nothing more than a source of funds for their benefit, for which you will receive almost nothing in return. Now, once again, I refer you to the previous presentation, episode 1, Franchise Buyer Beware, on whatever platform you downloaded this to understand how to identify this and the common traits of different types of franchisors. Definitely not trying to scare people off of franchises, because there are some great ones out there, and the traditional benefits that franchising was originally designed to offer are substantial. But you absolutely positively must do your research, really vet, and be objective about the performance of any franchise you are looking at, as your future may depend on it. Now, next, when it comes to analysing, and be brutally honest, number 2, can you afford the level of investment needed to turn the business around? It's really important to consider this, as it is a very common problem, whereby people scrape together just enough to buy their business, but not enough to survive afterwards. I stick my hand up here, as I mentioned, when I was 19 and purchased 2 pizza franchises, losing about $8,000 per week combined, with absolutely no working capital or access to finance. I nearly went bust every day for the first 9 months. I worked 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to save on labour costs. I slept on the floor of the restaurants because I couldn't afford petrol to go home, and there was no point in going home anyway because I would have to turn around and come back in a few hours. I pushed the patience of all my suppliers to the absolute limit and was regularly cut off. I juggled creditors and finances like crazy. And thankfully, though, I did have a plan to resurrect the businesses, and that plan worked. But had I fallen just a bit further behind financially, it all would have been over anyway, and my plan wouldn't have meant shit. Had I not worked 140 hours a week, then the same thing. The reality is that not having sufficient working capital or access to finance or credit was unbelievably stupid on my part. But I learned a very important lesson. And even though it got better, it left me with such a bad taste in my mouth that I decided I never wanted to do a business again. However, obviously time mellowed me, and I resolved to just be a lot smarter in future and learn from that very substantial early mistake. So, moral of the story, don't be like I was. Some of the things you will need to consider if you can afford include the initial purchase price. Pretty obvious. You won't get the business if you do not come up with the purchase price. I also include here that just because you can borrow the money, assuming you can, doesn't necessarily mean you should. If you have to make big repayments on loans every week or month, then this will raise your effective break-even and the amount of cash you need to have available for those repayments. And you need to factor this in, especially if you are talking about buying a business already losing money. Also, consider those immediate funds that need to be inputted. Now, this one requires some discipline. Too often, people buy a business, especially a rescue and turnaround business, and then overcapitalize like crazy. And by that, I mean they go and they buy new equipment, remodel the entire business, waste money on non-beneficial but showy marketing activities, put a helipad on the roof, or whatever unnecessary things they have thought of. Sadly, a lot of franchisors can be a real problem here as well. They will commonly insist that new franchisees spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on upgrading the business to the franchisor's latest model. Now, the reason I say that this is sad is, in my very extensive experience, this is almost never going to provide a positive return on investment for franchisees. Franchisors want you to upgrade the look and the feel primarily for their own benefit in most cases. And if this isn't the case, then ask the franchisor for proof that the massive expenditure they are asking for will actually provide a return on investment, at least sufficient to cover the cost of closing for the renovations, the cost of the refit, the cost of marketing to try and recapture all the customers you've turned away, and all the other associated costs. I know for a fact that 9 out of 10 franchisors cannot provide this, as it doesn't exist. However, if choosing to join a franchise, you may be bound by your franchise agreement to do this. So you need to factor the cost in as a substantial expense. that you are unlikely to see a return for a business that is probably already losing money. Now, having said all of that, you are likely to need to input some initial funds into a rescue and turnaround business to do things like replace broken equipment, fixtures and fittings, hiring and training new staff, some basic effective cosmetic changes to make the place look more appealing for customers, and marketing campaigns to start growing. And don't forget things like bank guarantees that may require you to lock up large amounts of money until you exit the business. But always ask yourself, is this expense necessary? That could be for operational, legislative compliance reasons, franchise, or customer reasons. Is it necessary right now, or can it wait a little bit longer? What are the alternatives to the expense? If applicable, could a piece of equipment be fixed as opposed to replaced? Do you really need the best quality piece of equipment right now, or would a second-hand piece of equipment with less bells and whistles suffice for the time being, as an example? If the expense is not absolutely necessary, then what return can you expect from that investment? Once you've worked all of this out, then you must work out if you can afford all of this. And then you also need to consider, if you can afford, the ongoing losses until the business can break even. Now, if, like me, you buy a business that is losing money, then don't expect that just through your sheer magical presence, it will start making money on day one. Sure, you might be able to cut some costs. Some initial marketing activity will probably increase sales if done right. However, depending on the situation, you need to allow months, or even in some cases years, to turn a business around. In the rescue and turnarounds that I've done, I typically aim for approximately 3 months to break even. But please keep in mind, I've done this many, many times in industries that I'm extremely familiar with. And it's only through applying the lessons learned over decades that I've been able to become proficient at this as basically a specialist. Next, you want to be brutally honest and objective about, do you have the level of skill necessary to turn the business around? So this is the third point. Within this, you want to think about things like, how do your previous experience and skills match what is required? This is one of the biggest miscalculations I've consistently seen over the years when people take over businesses at any level. They're quick to criticize the current management and say how much better they will be, but then take over and change a couple of completely insignificant things that achieves absolutely nothing, and sometimes even makes things worse, and then realize that results have not improved at all. There is just this natural, insane assumption that they are somehow so much better than everybody else when they really aren't, or that their presence is simply so incredible that things will turn around like magic. Another thing to remember is that there is a huge difference between running an existing business or working in an existing business where everything is humming along fine and all you need to do is keep the wheels turning, and having to genuinely take something that has crashed and burned into a complete and utter train wreck and get that back on track. I've seen a lot of people who consider themselves gun managers, experts, executives, CEOs, etc., who made their career out of keeping the wheels turning in existing businesses that were operating well before they got there, while they were there, and after they left, and probably would operate well for a reasonable period of time, even with no leadership or a well-trained parrot in their place, who then made the mistake of thinking they could take a disaster situation and somehow achieve the same results by doing the same things. There is a monstrous difference between running a well-oiled existing business and fixing a broken one, just like there is a difference between driving a car and having to repair a severely broken down car before you can drive it. These are totally different skill sets. Also, think about, are you really prepared to put in the effort that is required? Equally as concerning as people overestimating the value of their skills is people underestimating how much work is going to be required on their part. Anybody who thinks they're going to rescue and turn around a business quickly that is in a terrible state and losing lots of money by working a standard 38-hour week is almost certainly deluding themselves. Yes, I'm aware of the cliches of working smart and not hard, which is all very true. However, unless you have a heap of money to pay highly skilled and qualified people to do the work for you, then you are going to need to put in a lot of hours. If you aren't prepared to put in a lot of hours, then don't buy a business needing to be fixed up. In fact, probably don't buy a business at all. Look at buying something, if you do, that is already running well and profitable instead. Included in this, you need to consider your family and personal commitments. If your partner or kids are not going to allow you to put in the amount of time and effort that is going to be required, then you need to be honest about that. I've seen it before where somebody buys a business that requires a lot of hours, and then after maybe 3 months, their partner has had enough and is demanding that the business owner be home more and do family time, couple time, time with the kids, etc. Then the relationship falls apart, the business owner spirals into depression and loses interest in the business anyway. So it's a failed relationship, failed business, and a disaster all round. Additionally, and finally, when it comes to assessing if you've got the level of skills necessary to turn this around, think about if it will require a team, do you have or can you get a suitably qualified and experienced team? Particularly if taking over a larger business, having a team of people you can roll in to assist can be extremely beneficial. Otherwise, your options can be to try and hire off the street, which is getting harder and harder all the time, or to try and retrain and work with the existing team, which can work on occasion, but more often than not won't work so well, as at least a sizable portion are probably part of the problem. As a shameless plug, if you require assistance, FMS Support Services and myself are here to help. All right, now on to the next step. Step 3 is a complete overview and breakdown of each individual component of the current situation. A good place to start this is with an overview whereby you can complete a SWOT or similar analysis for an overall perspective. Now, SWOT, S-W-O-T, stands for Strengths, Weaknesses, Opportunities, and Threats, and is fairly popular and commonly taught as a business analysis format. The first part of a SWOT analysis is strengths. So strengths covers things such as what does the business do well, what do customers or clients like about the business, which areas is the business excelling beyond competitors, what is unique about the business, its products or services, what assets, intellectual or physical, are of value to the business. The W in SWOT stands for weaknesses. Here, we're looking at things such as what is the business doing poorly? What are customers or clients unhappy with? What is the business behind in compared to competitors? What is the business failing to match competitors on? What is the business lacking in terms of assets, resources, and knowledge? Next in SWOT, the O stands for opportunities. So here you're considering things such as how can the business win customers from competitors? What can the business do in the future to take advantage of untapped or underserviced opportunities? Are there emerging trends that the business can adopt early? Are there new markets or expansion opportunities available to the business? And finally, the T in SWOT stands for threats. So here you want to think about things such as what could competitors do that might threaten the survival of the business? What could happen in the market that would negatively affect the business? What possible situations is the business unprepared for? What damage could economic or political changes do to the business? Now, once this is done, you have a fairly good overview. But it's important to dig a lot deeper and essentially start creating a list of things that need to be fixed. And this is where you want to look at identifying everything that needs to be addressed, including things like revenue and expenditure issues. It probably goes without saying that most businesses in trouble will have issues with revenue and expenditure. Increasing revenue is one of the simplest and biggest things that can be done to fix a lot of issues. Often expenditure can be saved, but at the same time, business owners need to be careful about not trying to save themselves rich, particularly as an alternative to driving revenue. Too often, I have seen business owners try and cut costs here, there, and everywhere else, and the business suffers as a result. I've seen many businesses fail completely because they had cut costs to the extent that the business was operating so poorly that revenue actually fell faster than costs. However, when it comes to saving money by addressing genuine waste and inefficiencies, that is definitely something that needs to be thought about. Next, consider your staffing and team management. Here, when looking at the types of issues and detail that needs to be addressed, there's a heap that can be considered, depending on what you encounter. It could be insufficient staff, a lack of staff in key areas of the business, or poor mix of staff, lack of leadership or quality leadership, a lack of training, a lack of appropriate qualifications, a lack of availability or reliability of staff, poor attitude amongst staff, laziness and lack of work ethic, a focus on things like diversity, inclusion, and equity targets, particularly in larger companies, rather than a focus on getting the best employees and team. Here's a tip: if you focus on getting the best employees for your business and treating everybody well, you will naturally end up with a fairly diverse, equitable, and inclusive team without the problems that come with hiring based on quotas and what category people fall into. The main difference, of course, being that when you hire for quality and you hire the best people, you end up with a team that is also very successful. I say this having consistently employed people of all ages, races, religions, genders, transgender, sexual preferences, political beliefs, disabilities, without ever once setting out to do so. If you focus on filling roles with people that fit a key criteria, that is completely irrelevant to the position and the true purpose of the business, and make that a priority, then you will meet your DIE targets for sure. But this will be of little help to your business success. All right, rant over. Also consider any operational issues. So once again, this could include a lot of things, such as a lack of documented operational procedures, or worse, is a lack of consistency in the implementation of operational procedures. Poor operational results and performance in different areas, lack of KPIs, or lack of ability to achieve KPIs, low standards and or failure to meet standards, lack of compliance to legislative obligations, and the list goes on. Next, in terms of things that may need to be addressed, you've got marketing and promotional issues. Here could be identifying issues such as funds being wasted on marketing activity that is of no value, participating in some marketing activity that provides no tangible benefit or results, overpaying for some marketing activities, the opportunity to implement new marketing activity that will achieve tangible benefits and results, or potentially even an insufficient amount of marketing and promotional activity to begin with. Also, potentially, you might be wanting to look at equipment and maintenance issues. Depending on how much equipment your business actually uses will depend on how significant this is. Possibilities could include broken, unsafe, or missing equipment, equipment requiring upgrades, new equipment that needs to be purchased. Also, there is technology issues. Tech is such a big part of almost every business these days, but it evolves so quickly, and it is easy to get left behind. especially when your business is short on funds. Some things you will commonly find as issues might include outdated hardware, outdated or lack of maintained websites, e-commerce, social media presence, etc., outdated or poorly maintained POS systems, CRM systems, accounting or management software, and probably most commonly, a lack of effective use of technology to maintain, manage, and analyze the business. This usually tends to result in businesses that are flying blind with no real idea of what is going on. Another big thing to think about in many businesses would be supplier issues. So particularly for those businesses that are selling physical products to customers as opposed to services only. Things you might find here include poorly organized supply chains, which may manifest itself as a mix mash of different suppliers for the same products, mad scrambling every day to get stock and supplies, consistently running out of supplies, inconsistent quality, paying wildly different prices for products that should have relatively stable pricing. You may also encounter poor pricing and use of suppliers that don't provide the best value. Now, naturally, don't forget about things like utility and service suppliers such as electricity, gas, internet, telecommunications, waste removal, cleaners, security, professional services like accountants and lawyers, down to all manner of subscription services. All of these are suppliers of products or services and need to be considered if they are the best choice and the appropriate quality for your business. You may also think about whether there might be opportunities to renegotiate things like lease terms now or in the future. Also, you want to think about reputational issues. So more often than not, a business that is in trouble and in need of rescuing and turning around has reputational problems. These may either be the reason the business got into trouble in the first place, such as ownership and management with a bad attitude or a screw the customer style mentality, or often, and more sadly, as the business has declined, it simply hasn't been able to afford the things necessary to keep the customers happy, such as enough staff or suitable quality staff, or to have enough products available for customers. It is important to remember that the reputation doesn't ever simply get better just because you might buy a business and start doing things better. It can be a really long process. The reality is that customers may have found alternate businesses they are happy with. The majority won't even notice a change in ownership. And even when you promote this and spend a lot of money, a lot still will not pay any attention, as it just isn't a priority for them in their daily life like it is for you. Many people also hang on to grudges for a long, long time. And when they get irritated by a business, they will often convince themselves it was far, far worse than it was. And you, as a buyer of a business, would need to claw your way back, customer by customer. The approach, which I have personally implemented too many times to count, involves firstly fixing the issues and then marketing relentlessly to get customers to give your business another chance, while attaching the underlying under new management message at every single opportunity. Now, to understand the extent of the problem, you need to spend time in the business observing how it operates and see what upsets customers and what makes them happy. You can mystery shop the business yourself or get friends and family too in order to get the real customer experience. If applicable, order through different channels, in person, over the phone, online, through an app, through third parties on different days and times, and get the full spectrum of experience. Check out online reviews and feedback like Google and Facebook. And if it's a food business, don't forget third-party aggregators like Uber Eats and DoorDash. And finally, when identifying everything in detail that needs to be addressed, you want to look at administrative, legislative, and compliance issues. So Australia in particular is one of the most bureaucratic and red tape burdened countries for business to operate in throughout the world, with layer upon layer for business to contend with. However, all countries have some administrative and legislative requirements that businesses must meet. It is important to understand how the business is currently adhering to these, and also, if part of a franchise, you need to consider the requirements of the franchisor. Generally, there are three main reasons why businesses fail to adhere to administrative, legislative, and compliance obligations. The first is lack of understanding. Now, this is probably the most common reason, especially in small and medium-sized business, but also in very, very large businesses. Just today, I was reading about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of underpayment of wages amongst Coles and Woolworths staff, basically because Coles and Woolworths couldn't interpret and apply the award and all its requirements and conditions correctly to its staff. So even the big businesses are not immune to such lack of understanding. We've also seen many government departments fail to enforce correctly the requirements of their modern awards. But regardless of what type of business you're running, the burden of administration, compliance, obligations is immense, and they cover almost every aspect of the business. Everything from how you build your premises to when you can trade to how you can market, employment of staff, which, as I said, is already incredibly complex, especially in industries with so-called modern awards, OH&S, fire safety standards on products, what you can sell, food safety, liquor licensing, using vehicles, the people driving those vehicles, registering your business, registering your company, taxation, which is a whole lot of complexity all on its own. Leasing, buying sites, and then what you can do in those sites, even once you've bought them or once you've leased them. And the list goes on and on forever. In fact, you would be hard pushed to find anything in Australia that isn't regulated and burdening you with compliance obligations. You need to be a real expert to keep up with it all and get it all right. And the reality is that I've found when you look deeply or even skim the surface, most small and medium businesses fail because they just don't understand everything, and as do a lot of larger businesses as well. I guess the main thing that saves businesses is that the enforcement of the majority of compliance obligations simply can't keep up when almost everybody is getting it wrong. But for you, who is looking at buying such a business, you need to understand if the business is currently under investigation or in trouble with authorities, because in many instances, they will continue to focus on the new buyer. And also, and probably most importantly, what is it going to cost and how much extra work is required to do it right? For example, if a lot of the plant, equipment, fixtures, fittings, etc. at the site are currently not safe or not meeting Australian standards, what is it going to cost to upgrade? Then look at whether you want to proceed and most likely probably negotiate the price down accordingly. The second main reason for lack of legislative compliance is simply complete disregard for compliance obligations. Now, often there is a complete or partial willful disregard for compliance obligations. The only thing that might make this a bit hard for you to detect as a potential buyer is that often the business management or leadership knows in this situation that they are doing things wrong and therefore will actively hide it as best as possible. And don't just assume because the business is part of a franchise that you are safe. I was involved with a franchise not so long ago that had over 150 locations, mostly franchisee owned, of which a 90 to 95% were showing blatant disregard for fair work, modern awards, superannuation, and labour law requirements, and also often taxation requirements. For those that don't know, in Australia, the franchisor can also be deemed liable if they haven't tried to seriously enforce these requirements amongst their franchisees. But amazingly, when this was uncovered, quite easily I might add, as most franchisees were not even trying to hide it, and explained to the board the response of the franchisor senior executive, who had been keeping the board in the dark for years, was not just to cover it up, but to destroy all evidence of it, complete a new BS review, which said everything is fine except for a few franchisees that they wanted to persecute, get all franchisees to sign a statement saying they were doing the right thing, which of course means absolutely nothing given the circumstances, and threaten or dismiss everybody who was involved in the initial review. This wasn't even the first franchise where I've seen this approach play out. So here you had a franchisor who wasn't just looking the other way, but effectively enabling wage theft, underpayment of staff, illegal working arrangements, tax evasion, and everything else, to the point where franchisees were quite open with it and didn't even deem it a problem. Now, the first problem for you comes if you buy one of these businesses and look at financial statements saying that labour is costing 25 or 30%. If you then apply the correct pay rates, you might find out that labour is approximately 10% higher. You may also find out your taxation obligations have increased. And in a lot of cases, the employees you have need to have their hours cut or are not even meant to be working because of immigration restrictions. The second problem that might come for you is if you buy one of these franchises, you get caught by Fair Work, Immigration, or the ATO doing exactly what almost every other franchisee is doing in a network that is full of these types of issues, then you will still be fined, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it won't matter that it was done before you or by everybody else, although those franchisees will no doubt have their own problem at some point as well. And the final reason for a lack of compliance is a genuine inability to afford compliance. This is very common in businesses that are struggling, and it's sad to see that even in the most well-meaning of businesses, when you run out of money, many aspects of compliance suffer, especially those areas that are expensive and add no real value to the business. However, once again, you as a potential buyer, you need to assume that you are going to do everything right and understand exactly what is being missed and then what that is going to cost you. Firstly, to catch up, but then secondly, how much extra it will cost you on a regular basis to comply with the things the current business owner does not. The most important part about all of this, when identifying everything that needs to be addressed, is to be very specific about what the problem is. For example, you can't just say there are staff problems. You need to go into detail. You might find that there are 5 staff breaching visa immigration restrictions by a total of 100 hours per week. There are too many casuals or inflexible working arrangements at times when they aren't required. The manager has a hostile relationship with the entire team, etc., 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 depending on what you find. You need to include the names of particular staff and be as specific as possible about what is wrong so it makes it easier at the next step to develop a very prescriptive plan to implement. Okay, now on to the next step. Step 4, develop a plan to address each component. So by this stage, you know all the problems, the many problems that generally make up a business needing to be rescued or turned around. Now there needs to be a plan to fix each of those problems. So to do this, firstly, number 1, detail the plan you will implement to address each issue. Now, my approach is always to detail a solution to each specific issue identified. That makes it clear for everybody how each issue is going to be addressed. It is especially useful where a large number of staff and people are involved. However, even if there is a small number of people, having detail on the problems and the solutions helps ensure everything is addressed and helps keep everybody honest. I've presented a lot of detailed plans to fix different companies over the years, and they have generally been very well received, especially because they work. However, in all fairness, the criticism that has often been leveled at me, always from corporate types who make their living out of keeping the wheels spinning in circles while achieving no real forward motion, but talking a good game, with plenty of BS corporate cliches and buzzwords, is that there is too much detail. Can't you just write 1 or 2 pages on what we need to do, they will say. Now, my response is always that there is an executive summary for those that don't need to read the detail. That's your 1 or 2 pages. Otherwise, the detail is the plan. You can't detail and provide a plan on how to fix something that is fucked from top to bottom, completely broken, and in serious trouble in 1 to 2 pages. And anybody that thinks you can is clearly part of the problem. I mean, the instructions that come with a kid's toy are more than 1 or 2 pages. And it actually works and is generally fairly predictable. Anybody that thinks they can fix a seriously derailed business without putting some serious, detailed thought into the different problems and solutions is unlikely to be capable of doing it, as far as I'm concerned. In fact, they are likely to be the type that simply believe their sheer brilliance and magic personality will be enough to do the trick. It won't be. Next. Number 2, ensure the estimated timelines of each solution are included. Now, timelines are important to keep yourself on track as you fix a business. You obviously won't always hit your timelines, and other times you will be running ahead of time, which is great. But you need to keep yourself honest in terms of how many days, weeks, or months you are allowing for different solutions to be implemented. Otherwise, you end up with a situation where timelines will blow out, and years later, you have done very little. Then take this information and then prioritize the solutions. So you need to rank these solutions in order, and you do that with consideration to your ability to implement, the anticipated impact and benefit of those solutions, and you have to factor in cost considerations. Now, I personally like to mark items as either an immediate priority, an urgent priority, or a longer term priority in these types of situations. Obviously, immediate, meaning we get started on this even before commencing or on day one, depending on what it is, and we work hard to fix it ASAP. It is critical and essential, and we can fix it quick. It has a high benefit or return, and we can afford it. I sometimes refer to these urgent items as the low-hanging fruit. They are often the quick, easy wins that provide quick, easy, and very real returns. For some reason, I find a lot of people are hesitant to take these low-hanging fruit or quick, easy wins, almost as though it's cheating or lazy or unsophisticated or a simpleton solution. They prefer to do things the hard way. In reality, if you put a number of these quick, easy wins together, you are suddenly gaining forward momentum very, very quickly. And then if something is marked urgent, then it comes next. It is important, but it is going to take a bit longer maybe than the immediate priorities. You might be able to commence work on it straight away, but maybe it will take longer to conclude, or maybe you will start work on it a bit after the more immediate priorities. Maybe you even need to complete the immediate priorities before focusing on the urgent priorities, because the urgent priorities depend on the immediate priorities being addressed first. And then the longer term priorities are possibly either not going to make as much difference, require more funding or resources, or potentially they need other immediate and urgent priorities completed before they can be commenced. Alternatively, maybe they are more about taking the business to the next level than something requiring an urgent fix. I often even go so far as to color code these initial plans into, say, red, orange, and green, but this is more just to really reinforce the priorities for easy reference. Okay, so once you have your ideal plan as close to perfect as possible, it's time to go to the next step. And that is step 5. Understand the financial and other resources required. Now, naturally, once your ideal plan has been developed, you have to be really sure you have the resources to pull it off. Your plan covers what is required in a perfect situation, and now you hit the reality of whether you're going to have the resources to actually implement it the way you planned. In reality, this step for me is normally ongoing throughout the planning stages, because if I know there is a finite amount of resources, then the plan would have been developed with this in mind. However, for people who are just beginning down this path, it may be easier to develop the perfect plan and then cost it out from a resources perspective afterwards. The advantage of this is that you understand what the perfect plan is. And then if you don't have the resources, you can understand how much you have had to wind that perfect plan back, which can then affect your final decision about whether you go ahead or not. So assuming you've done the perfect plan, now we need to look at a few things. Number one, understand the current and projected cash flow and losses of the business. Now, hopefully, in terms of your early analysis of the business at step one, you at least understand your current profit or most likely loss and the current cash flow situation. Now, it is particularly important if funds are limited or non-existent and revenue is limited to budget and project forward for both cash flow and future losses, and then hopefully towards profitability as your plan hopefully results in improvements. Cash flow and creative juggling of debt, creditors, and bills alone is definitely not recommended. But I understand completely that in a real world, it is a reality for many, many businesses, as well as individuals and households, particularly in this country, but also many others as well. And it can buy you time while you are losing money, but not necessarily a lot of time, only weeks or months maybe. If in your projections you are clearly going to run out of money before your business becomes sustainable, then you should not be going ahead with it. As part of this, you need to, number two, understand how long your financial reserves or credit facilities can sustain the business until it achieves profitability. If you are buying a business that is in need of rescue or turnaround, then hopefully you are coming in with financial reserves and credit facilities. Unfortunately, if you are looking to rescue your own existing business, then you have probably already exhausted your financial reserves and credit facilities. But if you have these available, then you need to factor them into your cash flow and profit and loss projections. Obviously, as a disclaimer, this does not constitute financial advice, but business have access to a lot of extremely easy funds these days through bottom tier lenders and also non-bank FPOS providers such as Tyro and Square, which will literally offer you loans based on your FPOS turnover with no questions asked, and then keep a portion of your daily FPOS takings until the loan is repaid. The obvious things to consider here before taking the easy loans is firstly, if you really need to borrow the money, and secondly, what it will cost you in terms of interest and fees. As a general rule, the easier the loan is to get, the more it will cost you. Next point to consider. Number three, understand how much work and hours you or others will need to invest in order to effect the changes required. Time is a resource, and it is finite. Despite what you may see on LinkedIn, nobody I know has ever turned around or rescued a business in a very difficult situation by working 38 hours per week, or doing company yoga and hiring people based on boundless positivity, as people on LinkedIn might have you believe. And I say that with a caveat that if somebody is coming in with a lot of money and resources, such as private equity, then it is a lot easier on the people involved. Otherwise, get ready to work your ass off. You will need to work, and you will need to work hard. If it were easy, everybody would do it. And yes, I know that people love to say work smart, not hard, and it's true, and you need to work extremely smart. That's what your planning and execution of the plan is all about. But there is no escaping the fact that a tremendous amount of hard work will be required. Depending on the situation, depends on how long you will need to work hard. Although ask most business owners and managers, even of businesses that are not requiring a rescue or turnaround, and they will still be working far more than 38 hours per week. When I've personally purchased fast food or restaurant franchises that are losing a lot of money and needing rescuing and turning around, I've found that 2 to 3 months is how long I have needed if I am actively managing it myself, which I tended to do in my earlier days, but not so much as I've gotten older, where I would be working almost every day and often from open to close or something very similar. After that time, everybody is generally trained and a solid management structure and team are in place, and the business is generally profitable, and I could slowly step back. If I'm doing a much larger operation, like a franchisor that is in a very bad situation, which also almost always means that the franchisees are in trouble as well, then once again, assuming there is not a massive pot of money coming with it, then the extreme hours can be anywhere from 3 to 9 months before the franchisor and franchisees are starting to become profitable and things are starting to turn around. During that time, I would expect to be doing up to 120 hours a week in an extreme situation, or at least 80 hours if things were not as dire. Either way, it's a 7-day week, and every one of those days counts as a step forward. If you are able to surround yourself with a team of people who are prepared to put in the hard yards, then this definitely helps. Although sadly, when you are taking over something that is in really bad shape, my experience is that you might only get a small percentage of the existing team that are even trying, and many of the others have already switched off, stopped trying, and probably, unfortunately, need to go. And this is often compounded by the fact that there is very limited funds to play with, which means hiring good quality people may not be possible straight away. And then lastly, understand who you can negotiate with to delay payments, work out payments plans, or stretch out credit terms. Now, I'm sure the theorists out there will say you need to pay all your invoices, bills, taxes, and everything else on time without delay. And of course, under all normal circumstances, that is correct. I also have to put in a disclaimer here to say that this does not constitute financial advice, once again, and insolvent trading is illegal in Australia. However, with that said, if you are in a situation where things have gotten so bad that you need rescue and to urgently turn around your business that is riddled with debt, continuing to lose money, and getting worse, then you are now in a survival situation. Thankfully, or sadly in Australia, the percentage of businesses that fail is massive. It's the overwhelming majority because it is such a tough country to do business in. Not surprisingly, there are also less and less people prepared to do it. Hell, you can generally make more money in a minimum wage job or on welfare than you can in a lot of small or medium-sized businesses these days. And this means that your suppliers, the landlord, utility companies, banks, the tax office, and others have heard it all before, and they are aware of what it is like in business. So generally, they are prepared to help while also obviously protecting their own interests moving forward. However, the first step towards seeking help is to communicate. Explain your situation, request extensions if you need them, request payment plans to enable you to pay off the debt. Landlords in particular, who are generally one of your biggest creditors each month, might be prepared to even provide a rent-free period, temporarily reduce rent, implement payment plans, park some portions of the debt for a period of time, assist with marketing, particularly if you're in a large shopping centre or with a large landlord. Utility companies, phone, internet, electricity, gas, etc., are generally fairly flexible. A lot of them now you can just get extensions on your payment due dates through automated online services or over the phone. They know full well that if they cut off your supply, you are likely closed and they are unlikely to be paid the arrears or anything moving forward. So they're usually fairly lenient if it means they get paid at some point. Banks have a reputation for being tough, and they certainly can be, but at the same time, they are realistic and they can reduce or pause repayments on loans if approached. Of course, they will make more in the long run through additional charges and interest, and they know that full well, but talking to them can buy you some time. Similar with finance companies, generally the last thing they want to do is start repossessing stuff, as generally secondhand equipment is not worth much. Their best bet is to keep you going, charge you more in the long run, and if they can see you're on the edge of surviving, they will try and keep you going so they get more of their money before potentially reaching a repossession situation. Key suppliers are also worth talking to. They obviously want to retain you as a customer and keep getting your money rather than cutting you off. So arrangements such as putting you on COD or cash on delivery moving forward and putting the existing debt on some sort of payment plan might be considered depending on your suppliers. So to put all of this in perspective, I once took over a franchisor that was in extreme trouble, which included about 30 out of 30 restaurants losing money, usually between $3,000 to $5,000 per week, and all of them were in hundreds of thousands of dollars debt. This particular franchise network had been in steep decline for several years, and consequently every franchisee was between 3 months and 2 years behind with their rent. Almost all had been cut off from suppliers, and it had reached the point where franchisees who hadn't already closed and walked away were being evicted and locked out of their businesses by landlords and had legal action pending from all manner of suppliers, landlords, the tax office, and many, many others. And that doesn't even begin to cover the problems of the franchisor, which were actually far worse. However, a very basic principle of franchising is that there is no franchisor without the franchisees. So an urgent part of the plan I put together was to keep the franchisees alive and in business. And this plan was quite complex because of the complete and total failure and train wreck that existed. However, in relation to this topic, we, and by that I mean myself and one other person, which was the only other head office person we could afford to keep at that stage, had to go cap in hand to every single landlord. We had to explain to them that we're aware of the failings of the franchisor and the franchisee. The previous franchisor management is largely to blame and is now out of the picture, and that most importantly, we had a plan to fix it. You can proceed to lock the franchisee out, but they have nothing left, and you will get nothing from them. The franchisor cannot afford to operate the site and won't, and you will have to find another tenant. Alternatively, our plan will start turning things around in weeks. We will start ensuring you get paid moving forward and commence on a payment plan for the current arrears. Now, thankfully, the thing that worked in our favor was that the previous management of the franchisor was so bad and had such a bad reputation, and my reputation was quite solid. So they saw hope in just a change in management and direction and a plan. And as we backed this week by week by ensuring payments were made, they increasingly grew more confident in what we were doing. 30 out of 30 of the original sites kept trading, paid back everything they owed to the landlords, and became quite successful. All it required was the CEO and ops manager going cap in hand with a plan and a commitment to do better, and 100% of landlords accepted this. Now, don't get me wrong, I had my ass absolutely handed to me in about half of those cases. I literally had to endure verbal abuse, finger pointing, and one landlord who had the ability to make me feel like I was in the principal's office in primary school. However, ultimately, they all accepted what we were offering, and as our credibility grew, they knew they could trust what we were saying. Even when, in a few cases, franchisees ran into unexpected problems and we had to review plans for particular restaurants, with the credibility and respect we had built up, the landlords were fairly accommodating when we explained the situation. We made similar arrangements with equipment finance providers who had outfitted many of the restaurants. We coached franchisees to buy themselves time with the utility companies. Suppliers were a challenge, but as the relationship was so toxic that the franchise essentially had no real suppliers left, and the suppliers were basically just suing at that point. However, once again, going to these suppliers yielded results. We were able to get them to agree to supply our sites again, either COD or with very limited credit terms, agree to payment plans for the existing debt, and ultimately move forward with us and our franchisees. We either directly assisted franchisees, or if they still had accountants or bookkeepers, which most didn't by that stage because they hadn't paid them, we worked through payment plans with the tax office, who at the time were very flexible as they understood the importance of keeping businesses alive. This was for the benefit of employees, the economy, and even for the benefit of the taxation office itself, with a huge percentage of their revenue all coming through businesses. Unfortunately, in Australia, we currently have a Labor government that loves to crucify and demonise business, so it isn't as easy now, but it is still possible. Although they will only let it go so far before going after your business and the owners personally, which is their latest strategy with DPNs, or director penalty notices, which is a discussion for another day. But ultimately, the moral of the story is to have a good plan. As per what I was harping on about here, and communicate with creditors while offering solutions. It will not be their preferred solution, but if they can see it's the best solution they're going to get as business people, they are generally going to take it. But when you make these commitments and provide your proposed solutions, you must be good for it, and you have to bend over backwards to make sure you stick to it. In some cases, in the example I gave previously, I had landlords in particular who were very tough to deal with, and they told me point blank they weren't going to accept our plan, that our plan isn't good enough, and that they were going to lock the franchisee out if the entire $200,000, for example, is not paid within 30 days. In those cases, I advise them that I've already indicated the best possible plan we can put forward, with weekly repayments on the debt, along with keeping up with future payments. The franchisee cannot possibly pay $200,000 in 30 days, so we will start on this straight away, and I hope you can see that we are serious about ensuring you get what you are owed and will reconsider. Even in these toughest of the tough situations with ultra-tough landlords, in that time period when the landlord saw the debt getting smaller for the first time in years and current rent being paid on time, we were able to build credibility in the face of their huffing and puffing, and not one of those landlords actually went ahead with locking out the franchisee, because we had built some credibility and trust in a very short period of time, especially where there had been none previously. So don't give up, don't be discouraged. In summary, when dealing with creditors you are overdue with, communicate. Understand that ultimately what they want is to be paid. Be honest about your situation and be prepared to provide supporting data and evidence if required. Be open with your books. Be open with your profitability. Be open with your debt levels. Have a realistic plan that is different or better than the previous plan, if applicable. Make realistic commitments to your creditors that make the situation better, which means the debt gets less. Stick to those commitments with all your efforts and resources, and continue communicating and showing that you are committed to getting them what they want, which is to be paid. Alternatively, there are things you definitely shouldn't do when dealing with creditors you are overdue with, and this includes things like definitely don't ignore the situation, don't say there is nothing you can do about it, don't indicate you have no plan, don't make commitments you know you can't keep, don't break your commitments, and don't take out your frustration on your creditors. This is not their fault. Okay, so perhaps at the end of step 5, you determine you do have the resources to implement your plan, or perhaps you need to go back to step 4 and write version 2 of your plan that fits within your available resources. Many times where I've had to do this, because, for example, the board of a company has kicked it back saying they don't want to spend the money, then I tend to find that adjusting the timelines is the easiest thing to do. For example, if you are going to have less funds or people than needed, perhaps some things that were going to be done sooner are now going to be done a few months later. I find this is always preferable to scrapping things that needed to be done altogether, because if your plan had the appropriate amount of thought put into it, then all the things in your plan are important and need to be done at some point. Okay, now on to the next step. Step 6 is to critically evaluate your plan's chance of success. So, you now know your problems, you know what you need to fix them, and you know how long you expect it to take to address each issue or problem raised in your plan. And you know the financial and other resources you have and need to execute your plan. Now you need to take a really good and honest look at the big picture and your chances of success. You need to do this by ensuring that, number one, you are realistic about your plan's chances of success. Now, this is where you need to be really honest with yourself about whether your plan will work. Consider it from all perspectives. Do you have the resources, the funds, the time, the support from your team? Is it a long shot or statistically likely to be successful? This can be a bit hard to judge if you haven't done it multiple times before, but piece together whatever evidence you can to either support the likelihood of your plan being successful or not, and reach out for assistance from experts if needed. Consider if the timeframes can be achieved. Over the years, when I've put together plans such as this for businesses of all levels, I've obviously found that businesses which I own are generally no problem as I have complete control. Although once or twice I've had to wind back a plan because a business I intended to purchase in a regional area and not necessarily operate myself just wasn't going to be capable of finding the quality of management I would have liked and could get in a metropolitan market. So I had to wind back the plan to make sure it was achievable and then make sure the result it would produce would still be beneficial. The other big time where I've had to say that a plan will not work is when I've been involved as a consultant and encountered a key executive or a team of executives who had little intention of getting behind the plan and wanted to just keep doing things the way they were doing them. Likewise, the same thing when I've been in CEO or GM positions where I don't have the support of the board or private majority shareholders because they want to keep doing things the same, but somehow also want a massively better result. The stupidity sometimes is absolutely incredible. In these circumstances, I've just had to say that this is the plan that is the best chance of getting you out of trouble. If you choose to keep doing what you have been doing, then you will get the same result until you eventually go bust, and I will not be here for that. So I wish you all the best. Let me know if you change your mind. Sadly, in the majority of these circumstances, these boards or private majority shareholders have insisted on their existing strategy until they fail completely. And because the majority of these were franchisors, they took all the franchisees down with them. Other times, they chose to continue on the existing path for a period of time before finally relenting, which in some cases was too late and in other cases was just in the nick of time. I guess what I'm really saying here is that if you and anybody you need approval from, as well as your team, aren't committed to making genuine and real changes that will make a difference, then your chance of success is basically nothing. Attitude counts for a hell of a lot. Now, also consider this. Number two, if your plan is not as successful as initially intended, can it be adapted and revised quickly to ensure the overall goal is still achieved? Nothing ever goes 100% to plan, and that should be expected. If it is clear that a particular aspect of your plan is not working or not going to work, then that aspect should be updated and revised. More often than not, I find it will just need a tweak, an adaptation, a small evolution, not to throw the idea out completely. However, it is also important to understand how long those things implemented will take to show results. Sometimes, if you are dealing with marketing that is strongly promoted across rapidly deployed mediums like social media and has a strong call to action, then you can see results within days or a week. Alternatively, staff retraining can take weeks or months to be effective, and altering customer perceptions and buying patterns will generally take 3 months or more, even in businesses where customers order every week or so. An example of what not to do is a fast food restaurant I know of, which used to open every day at 10 a.m. and decided to start opening for breakfast. They did a fair bit of promotion, a specific breakfast menu, and a lot of signage, and then did it for 1 week. They were very fortunate to break even in that first week, but decided it wasn't good enough and it wasn't really profitable and stopped after a week. The reality is that just because they decided to open for new trading hours, most of the customers and most of the people in the area wouldn't have even known inside that first week, regardless of how much promotion they did. Furthermore, customers may have other plans for the week or just not cared at that time. They may have had other places that they frequent for breakfast and will make a note to try it again at some point in the future. The advice that was given to this fast food franchise by the franchisor, which was 100% correct, was to give it at least 3 to 6 months and evaluate trends and results as you go. But this was unfortunately disregarded by the franchisee, who somehow thought there was going to be an insanely profitable instant win with little to no investment, effort, or time commitment required. Unfortunately, wins like this are very few and far between. Now, finally, when evaluating your plan's chances of success, you need to. Number three, understand how long your business will survive if everything goes wrong. The current financial situation should be mapped out in terms of how long the business is capable of surviving if the current trend continues, or if things remain static or improve at a pace slower than expected according to the plan. Obviously, if the plan will not move things forward fast enough to rescue or turn around the business in any scenario, then there is no point proceeding with the plan. This then leads us on to the next section, which is step 7, be prepared to hit the ground running. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who will say to take your time and really get a feel for the business first. And I would 100% agree with that. If you have the time, it's definitely what I would like to do. We're not dealing with a business that requires an urgent rescue or turnaround. However, today we are talking about businesses that are in extreme situations and require drastic and immediate action to save them. So, as much as possible, number one, be 100% ready to hit the ground running and implement your plan on the first day. If you are buying or taking over a business that will need you to rescue and turn it around, be ready as much as possible before you take over. Don't simply walk in on day one and stand around with a curious look on your face while you figure it out. The 3 months or more you waste getting organized will cost you a lot of money and may be terminal for the business. As much as possible, the period of observation and learning that myself and others would recommend under normal circumstances should have happened before takeover, unless you have been given no advance warning or information beforehand. If you are taking over the management of a company or business that needs turning around, they may or may not be prepared to give you advance insight. I would always push for it so things can happen quicker once you start. And if you are turning around your own business that is losing money, then obviously you should be starting as soon as you have a plan that you are confident with. But whatever you do, don't continue doing the same things you are doing for a second longer than you have to. Number two, ensure that communication with the existing team and especially management is open and effective. Communication with your team is always essential, especially in this type of turnaround situation. When your team understands the situation, what needs to be done, and the plan, they are much more likely to be on board with what's happening. Now, I also have to be honest that in really bad rescue and turnaround situations, it's very hard to bring 100% of the existing team along with you. The sad reality is that the existing management, executive, leadership, and the general team are probably part of the problem. However, I will say that in almost every business, especially larger businesses, there are often a few people, at least, in the team who recognize on some level that things are not currently being done well, and that is a really good start. There are probably others who can be brought along with logic, details, and explanations, but some others will either be openly hostile in a small number of cases or subtly resisting, quietly criticizing, even sabotaging, and certainly not supporting the changes you are seeking to make. Whatever you do to bring as many people along as possible, it's important to avoid criticizing people in the current team or their previous performance. Often I prefer to think of most of the existing people as victims of circumstances beyond their control, even if they were actually a big part of the problem or it was entirely their fault. In that way, you can try to avoid as much personal offense as possible. It's also important not to dwell on the past problems too much, other than for learning purposes, and simply focus on the path forward. However, overall, it is important to identify who is who and very quickly, and then shed the ones that simply will not come on board with a new approach and are prepared to sink the entire business in the false belief that they know what they are doing. As tough as that is, and as tough as getting rid of staff is, and nobody hates it more than I do, sometimes in order to save the business, yourself, and everybody else's job, you have to do it. I once stepped in as a consultant to assist a franchisor that was in an extreme amount of difficulty, and they were doing almost everything wrong, and it was evident in the results. To graph them just showed a dramatic plummet over 2 years, in particular of franchisee and franchisor revenue and profitability. Every franchisee was in extreme debt and losing money, but the support office team was absolutely convinced they were on the right track. I met with the leadership first, and they confidently told me that this was a restaurant franchise. They were almost exclusively dine-in, and their point of difference was their level of service, as opposed to their more fast food style competitors. And they also told me that they had no idea why things were going so bad. I met with the marketing team, who told me that the brand was being promoted as a cool, trendy location where people like to hang out for a great experience of food and drinks. They could charge top dollar and didn't do any price-based promotions or discounting because it would cheapen the brand, the same brand, incidentally, that closed another restaurant every month and had all other restaurants completely empty and falling apart. The ops team just said that the problem was the franchisees and the fact that the franchisor was too weak to breach them, take legal action, and throw the bad franchisees out. More specifically, the problem was that franchisees were not executing the company's model correctly, which was this trendy dine-in brand for dinner and drinks. Everybody in the support office blamed the franchisees. The support office executive also blamed the lower level support office team, and the lower level support office team blamed the executive. Finally, we had a group meeting with the support office team, and one of the things I will always remember is one of the more vocal people in the team sitting there and saying that the franchisees are all useless and we are not going to do anything further with them until they get better. And then somebody added that the only solution is to shut everything down, get rid of all the franchisees, and start again from scratch. Hiding my frustration with such stupid comments from a support office team, I politely queried that you can't possibly mean to shut down all restaurants. Which ones are you talking about specifically? So we pulled out a list, and they literally crossed off about 93% of the restaurants on the list, leaving only a few remaining, and said that those few could possibly be saved. That was a point where I knew this team was beyond saving. With the exception of one person in that team who quietly came to me away from the group and said that he didn't necessarily agree with the rest of them and thought that there might be a better way. And even though he was unsure of what it was, he was the one support office person that we initially ended up keeping. And he did great things with the franchise network. Incidentally, the analysis of the existing head office support team was off in every single way. What they described as an above average quality dining experience where people would gather for dinner and drinks was in fact the worst experience I'd ever had, consistently across almost all sites. The average site was completely empty, falling apart, couldn't even afford to replace light bulbs, wouldn't even bother to put the furniture out each day for customers. The sites couldn't afford staff anymore. Most of the franchisees were completely untrained. Many of them couldn't speak English, which for those outside of Australia is the only common language spoken in Australia. A lot of the franchisees had their elderly parents brought in from overseas to work for free, and they were often serving using a POS system that was so dysfunctional that it couldn't even process an order properly. They were out of most ingredients and drinks at all times and would frequently just duck out to get ingredients in small quantities from the local supermarket as they were needed because that's all they could afford. Often, when a customer ordered, you would see the franchisee suddenly run out of the restaurant, go to the supermarket in the shopping centre for ingredients, and come back. Some restaurants barely served 100 customers a week. And I could go on and on about how far off this support office team was in their assessment of what the brand was. Potentially, the only thing the support office team got right was that the franchisees were terrible. But as I said to them, your support office team approved them, trained them, or failed to train them, and have been standing by why they failed and performed terribly ever since. Incidentally, with a new team and a comprehensive plan, the entire network turned around very quickly. Every single franchisee became profitable within about 12 months and worked their way out of debt. And the franchisor also became very profitable within just 8 months. It certainly wasn't easy for me, the support office team, or the franchisees. But once we had the team that believed it could be done and had the right plan, not one single site was shut, despite the existing team of support office experts insisting that almost all should be shut and were unsavable. So that example just highlights the importance of communicating and sorting out who on your team is going to be effective and a supporter of your plan and who is not. Okay, now finally on to the last step. Step 8 is to continually review and update your plan. Now, very seldom does any plan such as this go 100% as detailed. So this section is all about continually referring back to your plan, adjusting and modifying if necessary. In order to do this effectively, number one, you need to keep yourself honest and on track with your plan as much as possible. Now, this requires objectivity more than anything. You need to consider your plan and how you are progressing and be honest with yourself. Also, number 2, refer back to your plan and ensure you are addressing the issues you have highlighted without getting distracted. You almost want to be using your plan as a checklist. Try to avoid procrastinating and excusing yourself. The details and outcomes required of your plan are important, so continue to pursue them. And then, number 3, if new things are discovered that need to be addressed or a situation changes, incorporate it into your plan. You probably didn't get everything into your plan beforehand. As you learn more, you will no doubt discover other things that need to be added into your plan. If it's important and beneficial, then add it in and action it. And don't forget about the next point, which is to continually review your financial situation to ensure that your financial plan remains aligned or better than projected. You should have definitely done projections on your future financial situation, cash flow and profitability in particular, as we discussed earlier, to understand how you would keep the business alive financially as you rescue it and turn it around. Given that the financial situation is likely to be very precarious, you have to pay very close attention to it. In extreme situations, I've had to monitor it daily or at the very least weekly to ensure we were staying on track. If you aren't staying on track, then you need to revise everything. Some well set up spreadsheets really help to do this quite simply, but of course, there are much more complex programs that you can also use to assist. Obviously, if you are burning through money and gaining losses faster than expected, then you need to respond, usually by either accelerating your plan or slightly modifying your plan. Alternatively, if you're doing better than expected, you can often use those surplus funds to accelerate your plan and achieve things faster, which is when things start to get exciting. A few extra dollars one week can multiply the benefits by the second week, and even more so by the third week. Things can start to improve really quickly if surplus funds are used effectively. So, that is a basic outline of a very generic process for approaching a rescue and turnaround operation. It is obviously hard to try and make what we have covered reflect all possible business scenarios across all industries and small, medium, and large businesses or corporations. So please take the above and apply it with some thought to your situation if you wish. In the next full-length presentation, which will be episode 7, which will come after episode 6, which will be the Q&A for this session, I will be delving into some additional considerations for those taking over or potentially already running franchisors in need of rescuing or turning around. This is probably one of the most requested topics to cover, which might say something about the challenges being experienced in many franchise networks, especially within Australia. Hopefully, this presentation about business rescue and turnaround has been useful. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is based on my experience and what has worked well for me over 3 decades. Not everybody will agree, and others may have a totally different approach. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@fmssupportservices.com.au for a personalised, confidential, and definitely free response. Otherwise, if the option is available at the point of download, feel free to leave any comments or your questions in the comments section or on Facebook or LinkedIn where you may have found this link, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Remember that you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts from. There are plenty more presentations coming up in the near future. If you have any suggestions or requests for topics, please let us know and we will add them to the list. If you have found this useful, please leave us a positive review and a 5-star rating, as it will assist the algorithms in sharing it with other people that may find it useful. Otherwise, if you know anybody that may benefit directly, please feel free to share the link directly with them. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you again soon.